No, I do want that. Okay, welcome everybody to Talking Niagara. I was just flipping around getting the screens in order at that point. Hey, Angela, how are you doing today?
Oh, pretty good.
All right. Welcome everybody to Spin Legal on August 21st, 2024 with Angela and myself. Tonight our topic's going to be the origins of the paralegal movement in Ontario. And just to let you know, if you need to contact me, Peter Giblett, or Angela, you can do so on 905-688-5598. And we're at Invictus Legal LLP. And you can contact Angela by angela@weareinvictus.legal or me at peter@weareinvictus.legal. And our website is https://weareinvictus.legal. There you go.
Yeah.
So origins of the paralegal movement is something I know that's kind of dear to your heart. As a long-standing paralegal, I mean, how long have you been doing this? Forever and a day? Sounds like
Yes.
24 BC.
Yeah, about that. Hey, I've been doing it long before a lot of people who are in this movement have been born. And some of them were only like 10 years old or 12 years old when I started. And today they think they can do it. And the problem is, it's a very highly regulated profession. And I think that it takes a lot of practice before they can get very good. And unfortunately, the paralegal movement is being over licensed today. There's too many paralegals, and many of the new ones are not doing the public a service. I'm not saying they're bad or anything. It's just that I think the education system has to be more and has to provide more to the new paralegals who are entering the field, because it is a very difficult type of thing to do and to be successful in. Like I've been here for 32 years doing this, and
32.
Mhm.
You cannot be doing this for 32. You only look 32.
I know, I know. I love that
That
compliment.
unfortunately, of course, gentleman always has to say that to a lady, doesn't he?
Yes, of course,
Otherwise
of
it's a
course.
smack across the face type situation.
Well, it's better than saying, "Are you pregnant or you're just fat?" Which was asked to be one time when it was carrying my son.
All right.
That didn't work
Okay.
very well for him.
Yeah. So you've been doing it for 32 years. Wow.
Mhm. Yep.
Okay. So what was
First
the
part
first?
time and then later on full time in '98 and onwards.
So what was the first thing you ever did as what you would term a paralegal today?
The first thing I did was back in the day before licensing, we did family. We did some small claims. We did various like provincial offenses, traffic court. There was a lot of different things paralegals did and we focused on. And but at that time there was a lot of lawyers were pushing and getting people to a point where they wanted to whip them into shape and saying like, oh, they're practicing law without a license. And there was this unauthorized practice of law thing going on where literally people would be sent people who thought they were clients and they would set them up to be a judge to be practicing law without a license.
But
And
there's
there was
been
enough of us and a lobby of enough of us so that they just didn't shut us down. But they made it so that it would come into this little box that later would become the paralegal profession.
yeah.
And the little
But
box is
there's
not big enough.
so you've been around for 32 years, but there's this case, Regina versus Laurie and Points Limited in 1987. So that's longer than
Yeah, that's
32 years
longer.
ago,
It's longer than me. Hey,
right?
that was a gentleman. He was a police officer in Ontario, and I don't know if you're familiar with the Sherry Morningstar case. He handled the Sherry Morningstar case in Toronto, which a little girl was kidnapped, and that sort of thing. And later on, he went on to leave And then he later on opened up his traffic practice, and he opened up points. And then he was also being chased down about
Thing is,
unauthorized practice of law.
yeah, and the thing is, of course, points. Everybody's heard of points, right? Because they are a
Mhm.
traffic ticket specialist, and they are actually they're a, what do you call it?
Franchise.
They're a franchise, yes,
Yeah,
traffic ticket franchise, yes.
yeah,
Um, Very well known. So Laurie is actually the founder of Points, isn't he?
yep. He was the
Um,
founder of Points, and then later on, other people set up franchise chapters of Points, and they continued to do traffic. They were pretty well restricted to traffic court issues, anything in the
yeah.
provincial offenses type thing.
So his name was Brian Laurie, isn't it?
Yeah, Brian Laurie.
And he was a 15-year veteran of the Metropolitan Toronto Police Department, and also worked in Essex Constabulary in UK.
Yep,
Yeah, it's
exactly.
funny. I know somebody else who worked. I knew
Yep.
somebody else who worked for Essex Constabulary.
And he has that accent too. If you
Whatever.
ever bump into him, you can share your experiences from the UK.
If I talk to him, he'll agree with me that we do not have accents.
Oh, yes, you do.
Yeah.
So this was going on, and then this case came out and said, hey, I mean, like Section 800 in the criminal code allows the definition of agent to be expanded to non lawyers to act as agents in court to represent people. This was a big thing. Started off with the Law Society, went into the court, then he was charged
Okay.
criminally for not failing to, for unauthorized practice, and he appealed it all the way up. And I believe it went to the Court of Appeal, and then they said that that settled it. So they can't be denying people from that point on for the right to represent people. So then became this dispute about, okay, so who's qualified to represent people? So this has got to be an issue. And I used to dispute that with people about qualifications, okay? Because we had a whole range of qualifications, a lot of us, when we first started in the paralegal movement. There was a group that started Agents of Court, which there's Jack Barrow, Andrew McKay, Rick Sloan, John Bird. I know John Bird, but I know mostly Greg Bird and Robert Bird. They come from a family of paralegals. Cool people.
Just to let everybody know, I've put the link to the case Regina versus Laurie and Points Limited in the comments beneath. I hope that transfers across to Facebook when we move it over later on.
So what happened after that is that there was a group of people, they just started to go in, and more people started to say, okay, well, why don't we just do uncontested divorces or help people with separation agreements or change of names, little things like that. They started to do that. There was a number of people. There was a woman in Toronto by the name of Molly McDowell.
A lot of that actually would be things that I guess would be things like divorces, uncontested divorces, etc. So a large amount is about form filling, right?
Most of it's form filling, putting things together and talking to people. Most of the time when you get an uncontested divorce coming through your door, people have sorted things out, or maybe they have nothing to sort out. They just want to split up.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Like you got two older
They're
people in their
splitting up.
60s or 70s. They don't own property. They just want to split.
Yeah, we're splitting up. You're having the dining table and the kitchen sink, and I'm taking my record collection, and we're done.
And then we have an agreement on who sees the dog on which weekends. So it was very simple.
Yeah.
So people did all of that stuff. But still lawyers got upset. Oh, they're practicing law without a license. Maybe people know about Maureen Bolt. Maureen Bolt started off as a mediator. Then she went into doing a lot of these family law type of things and separation agreements and so forth. It wasn't so much that she did them, but it was more that she was boldly doing them. She put up big, huge billboards. You're paying your lawyer how much?
Yeah.
Hey, come to me, save money. And they went after her. And eventually she had to plead guilty to one offense of practicing law without a license, and she served 4 months of in-house arrest while she had to quit city council because they wouldn't allow her to be absent that long. I
So
mean, nowadays with hybrid meetings, she probably could have done it, but unfortunately at that time she couldn't. So she was one of the other ones that did this. There was a lot of missteps, a lot of political problems, a lot of backbiting. The paralegal movement is still problematic,
So
because
tell us something about the Ontario Task Force of Paralegals. This was back in 1988, I believe this was created.
yeah, that's the Professor Browne report. He was a law professor at University of Windsor,
Yeah.
and what he did is he wanted to see what kind of areas of practice that could be available for non lawyers. So he went out and did a report, and this report eventually got sent to the Attorney General, and then the Law Society. I guess the Law Society said, no, 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 you can't have people do that kind of stuff. You can't be stepping on our turf. Okay,
Yeah.
and this was back then. Okay, like since then there has been a lot of changed minds, because sometimes you have to keep knocking on the door until somebody lets you in. Okay? But Ron Ianni was he had that report, so that originally started off a lot of stuff, and people were going in there. And then later on, there was that he headed the task
There
force.
were a variety of other reports, parliamentary reports under Harris as well, weren't there?
Yeah. There was one, and the most famous one that we know was appointed in 1999 by the Harris government, and by the Honorable former Chief Justice Peter Corey from the Supreme Court of Canada. He did the report, and he did a wide consultation on the whole thing. Went across Canada, toured things, had town halls, had various people sending in stuff. I still have my report that I wrote to Peter Corey. And I also talked to his assistant, and we worked through a lot of questions and answers, and we did a lot of that during that time.
Is that this one, the provincial task force?
Yeah, that was a provincial task force. And Peter Corey, he did set that up. He was the head of it, and he was appointed there. And usually you appoint somebody important or with high profile to write these reports, and just for them to collect dust on shelves.
And just to be clear, Justice Peter Corey would have been a lawyer, right?
Yes, he was a lawyer, and he was a judge. He was a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And shortly after he stepped down, and then they asked him to do this.
So as a former Chief Honourable Justice, he basically is writing something. Just to be absolutely clear, that as a lawyer, he's writing something that potentially goes against the lawyers in Ontario.
Yep.
And supporting the paralegal movement by doing so.
Yep. See, this is one of the things that's very unusual that I've always encountered when dealing with the paralegal politics, is that a lot of lawyers are with us. A lot of lawyers want to work with us, and I wouldn't have learned a lot of things I did without a lot of supportive lawyers that I worked with over the years at the very beginning prior to licensing. And very good people. They just said that they wish that, they just said, just keep doing what you're doing, but don't be too loud about it. I don't know what they meant by being loud. Hey, we just joined an association.
We covered in an earlier show the fact that in Oregon and in the UK, paralegals are representing in tribunals and other lower courts. The fact that this paralegal movement is actually getting outside of Ontario.
Ontario was the first. We're the pioneers.
And today there are paralegals, some from Ontario that are operating as paralegals in Alberta, and there's some talk about provincial change in British Columbia.
Yep. And they're doing something very unusual in British Columbia, where they're taking the power away from the Law Society to regulate both professions, and then setting up a public body to regulate both, which is very unusual. There's a lot of fight back going on from the lawyers, particularly because their perception of judicial and legal independence. I can understand that because I don't want to be regulated by the government, and I don't think too many of us want to. They do that in China. They regulate lawyers in China.
Well, it's a different matter entirely.
Yeah.
It's easy to criticize China,
Yeah.
but there's some other countries. There are plenty of other countries that also have judicial or legal review bodies in as parts of government. Because
Yeah.
if you think about it, government is the potential place where reviews and things can happen, because legally government actually often sets standards and
Mhm.
polices those standards, right?
Mhm.
So it's a logical choice that legal professionals would be governed by Parliament,
Mhm.
but would also be policed by acts of Parliament. So there would be a body that controls what you can do as a profession, and there'd be a separate body that would actually regulate how that profession works and would take complaints and would do things like that. Much in the way that many professions actually have tribunals and complaints organizations, like the nurses' colleges, for
Yeah.
example.
Exactly. They're very differently set out, like, and the rules kind of vary between the legal profession and healthcare professions. Okay. So this is very interesting because this carried on, and so there was more talk about regulation. The Paralegal Society of Ontario, which I was part of, there was also the Institute of Agents at Court, which was going around, which was primarily traffic, but not necessarily only traffic. But we did a lot of work together, and that was basically the kind of stuff that we needed to do. Okay, so basically, we were a lobby group. We've had many meetings with different things. Our goal was to set up self-regulation at that time. That was our goal. Can't. Yeah, our goal was to set up self-regulation. Okay, and this is what we were hoping to do. And there was a whole battle royale, because there was in 2001, the Law Society started making some noise about a paralegal task force, which was included. Um, it started off, they wanted to bring all the paralegal groups under one called the Professional Paralegal Association of Ontario. And this would include several paralegal and other organizations that did work, like the Institute of Records of Court, Ontario Searchers of Records, Paralegal Society of Ontario, as well as Society for Adjudicators and for prosecutors. So they had different groups, as well as Institute of Law Clerks. I don't know why they put the law clerks in there because they're very different. But they included all six groups.
Well,
And
I'm presuming that they put in law clerks because at one point, the term paralegal in many places outside of Ontario, the term paralegal is essentially a law clerk.
yeah, yeah, if you went to the States, it could be that way, or some province where we haven't yet licensed paralegals. So this is where it's getting kind of confusing. So they told everybody, you're going to work together under this new provincial Professional Paralegal Association of Ontario. It was an association that worked together. They appointed two members to the board of each association, and nobody liked it. And because it was led by a fellow, I felt sorry for him and love him so much. He was also the head of the prosecutors group, and he
But again,
tried to communicate with people, tried to get them to be more moderate in their responses to things. And he kept telling people, well, it's going to be the Law Society and it's coming. Everybody literally said they didn't want to be regulated by the Law Society. They were fighting back. So we actually built a war chest. We had people like Hurricane Reuben Carter and people come in. We also hired a lobbyist. We hired Frederick Siemens to do a Siemens report, which would outline what paralegals could be capable of doing and how we could learn it. And we put that forward to the Attorney General's office and so forth. And we tried to fight back. And this was also under the PPAO because the PPAO board had to respond to the people that supposedly it represented. But we were speaking about that. But what happened was in 2002, after this was formulated, the Law Society sort of got bought out with us. They bought us out. Okay, so the Law Society wrote out a report. I believe this was done with the help of some of the people who were either deputy judges or judges at the time. They said, okay, paralegals can do this, but they can't do that. They ruled out family law completely. They ruled out certain things on criminal. They ruled out a whole bunch of things.
What was this the paralegal task force in the Law Society?
It was between the Law Society and the Attorney General.
But this is pre-regulation.
Yeah, this was pre-regulation.
So this would be what then Attorney General Michael Bryant or other Attorney General?
Michael Bryant was then under the Liberals under that because remember Dalton McGuinty got it in 2003. He appointed Michael Bryant, who's actually quite good. He also headed the Civil Liberties Association of Canada for a while. Okay, very bright. And so he advised as Attorney General that he wanted the Law Society to be the regulatory body, which came as no surprise to us because we saw it coming. We saw this coming. Like Stevie Wonder saw this coming.
Well, I was going to say, one of the questions, I've seen a number of papers that were written around, academic papers that have been written, let's say, from about and not just here in Canada, but in a lot of the English speaking world, from about 1990 up until even today, about questioning about access to justice and needing the cost to lower the cost of legal services. And one of the quotes about that was that a person who's a fifth year legal associate for a mid-range firm in somewhere like Hamilton probably wouldn't be able to afford to pay for his own services.
Yep.
Right.
And I could pay for my own services.
and that was actually taken as being a big challenge that we had in society. As I said, not just here in Canada, but US, UK, much of the English-speaking world, even like I remember seeing a German report on this question about accessing to justice and needing to lower the cost of services. Of course,
one of the problems is this is all right to talk about access to justice and lowering the cost of services and so forth. But the question has never asked, why is the cost of services so high? Hey?
Well, it's easy to make an assumption that, hey, a corporate lawyer, you pay a corporate lawyer $1,000 an hour, and that's a ripoff. But in fact, actually, it's not a ripoff at all. It's it's what such people can attract if they so desire.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And also, too, even those middling or near the bottom of the food chain, they still have to charge a certain amount of money for services. There's people out there who are paralegals, maybe new just out of school. Oh, I'm going to go there and I'm just going to undercut all my competitors. Yeah, I would say go right ahead. They'll soon discover that there's a cost of business that they have to do.
Yeah, and we'll see whether you have a license in 3 years' time.
Yeah, exactly. See whether you can even stay where you put if you get an office.
And part of the problem, challenge about that is when you think about it, it's like, okay, so you go out and get yourself a two small offices in a commercial building, because hey, you've got to think about the fact that you've got to have a legal secretary at some point. You might not need them today, but in a typical small town in Ontario today, probably that 700, that like 500-600 square foot of office space that you're going to rent there is probably going to cost you $1,000-1,500. It depends where you go.
Mm-hmm.
1,000 probably in somewhere like Hamilton, $1,500 easily in Toronto, maybe even higher other places you go.
Exactly.
And that's just the basic office.
Yeah. And then there's some people who think, oh, well, I can just operate out of my home. It'll be free. Okay, I operated my business out of my home when I first started. It was not free.
Well, in fact, very often so you operate the business out of your home. That then means that you probably ought to have a separated mailing address.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to actually have to go out and get a UPS box, because that's the most reliable way I'm going to get my, it feels like I'm in an office block, by using a UPS box.
Exactly. They can give you what they call a corporate address.
Yeah.
And the other thing that you have to do is many clients want to meet you in person. Do you want them to come over to your house?
No, certainly not if they're criminal. Just imagine. Oh, I see that vase over there. I see that vase over there. I've got my eye on that vase.
Yeah.
Oh, and that lamp.
Then you have to keep your house clean all the time, and you have to. It's really miserable. So you have to say, okay, I would just want to get someplace I can meet with my clients, and those places rent out for about $800 a month now.
Yeah, and again, some of the kinds of things is what you can't do is you can't meet your clients at Tim Hortons.
Right, because of regulations.
Yeah.
Because of the aspect of privilege. For example, even if you do manage to work from home, you have to work separate from your family.
Yeah.
So you have to have some room or an office where if you're talking on the phone, other people can't hear you.
Let's assume that actually, let's assume that you manage to rent some space where you meet your clients in a boardroom at some shared office space, so you can talk privately in the boardroom. All you need to do is call them up and say, hey, I need the boardroom at 2:00 on Thursday, and they'll say booked, right? So you meet your client at said boardroom, and maybe you have expenses of $100-200 a month by doing it that way. Saves you on an office, gets you you can meet them.
It's actually more than that. You have to get a membership.
It probably is, but
you have to get a membership.
Yeah, and
then you have access to it whenever you want.
Well, in fact, some of those
hotel thing, they call it hotel. Yeah.
Well, some of those ones, they actually depends on which location you go to.
Yeah.
Right. And some of those ones you can actually even get your business address can be there, right?
Yep. So they have a business address. They do your reception. They do everything. Yeah. And they're very good. They do good, but it's not cheap. Like I looked at those two, and I figured I might as well just get my own office.
But here's the question. So you're adding, there's a sliding scale of offices. You certainly get a two-room office, and that two-room office could easily be, run you $700 or $800 a month these days, and go upwards. If you have 5-6 room office, you could be easily into $3,000 a month, dependent upon where you are, right?
It depends on the
point being is that in relation to access to justice, we're talking about lowering the cost of legal services. But how can you do that? And when you think about it, a two-room office, whether it's occupied by a lawyer or a paralegal, is still going to cost you the same amount of money.
Absolutely.
A 5-room office, whether it's occupied by a lawyer or a paralegal, is still going to cost that business the same amount of money, right?
And then because of regulations, we have to be very careful. If you're having client files, you can't have them laying around at your house. You can't have them laying around just anywhere. Eh? And if you're going to be renting one of those office spaces, you know, like it's probably best that you get something that's a permanent place you can put your filing cabinets, your
Yeah.
files,
Oh yeah.
and insure it. You have to insure everything, fireproof everything. Like
Well,
there's a lot
actually,
of things
and there
people
you
don't
go.
get. Like it's not like there's a lot of people who run their businesses from their home, but this is a different business than
Yeah.
you than run from your home. Some people do it well, but they have to have that extra space, that they go outside. Because
Okay.
sometimes Johnny over there wants to meet you in person or drop off some documents with you and talk to you. So you have to be able to get there and back. You have to be able to insure both premises. You have to insure where you're storing your documents, a whole bunch of things. Okay? These things
Or if
start
you would,
costing money. Software that you use,
yeah.
communication, your client management, your customer management, your website, your SEO management.
Angela, I've solved the problem, or at least I didn't solve the problem. The Lincoln lawyer solved the problem. Your files are in the back of the Lincoln. You sit there and you have a driver. Doesn't that work?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so this is where a lot of this comes in. And unfortunately, there are people out there who think they can so, well, I'll just go for $50 an hour and they'll see if, I'll probably get all kinds of business. Okay, first, a lot of people aren't going to take you seriously. But secondly, even if they do take you seriously and you do the $50 an hour, you're going to soon find out, I'm not making any money. I
Yeah.
have to start, you know. So this has become a very much of a reality. And to me, this also impacts on access to justice. So this comes to our next question where we started examining things. So after we were put in, they passed this Bill 14. So Bill 14 came in under Michael Bryant, as it stated, that we talked about that he passed this the act to regulate the legal paralegal profession. We were permitted to do certain areas of law, but not other areas of law. And this gets reinterpreted over the years as to what we can do and what we can't do. And unfortunately, you know, they really need to broaden a lot of these areas so that paralegals can practice in different areas. Paralegals are pretty
Well,
free to practice in tribunals and small
yeah,
claims
but
court.
there's a thing, for example, why can't paralegals accept legal aid?
Yeah,
Right?
we get
And
called that all the time. The guy walks in with the legal aid certificate, and there's an area of practice that we can do, perhaps in the criminal code, like you can do a summary conviction offense, and they walk in with a legal aid certificate. We can't use the legal aid certificate because they don't allow anybody but lawyers to take them.
yeah. And that actually that's a bit of a perverse way of dealing with it, right? So
Yeah,
legal aid, and again, some people get legal aid certificates for things like landlord and tenant board matters.
very rare.
It's rare, but it does happen.
Yeah,
And there's various areas of
and
law
it's
where
usually
you can
legal
get legal
clinic,
aid
and it's
certificates.
usually legal clinic.
I know,
Yeah,
but again, the fact that paralegals can't take legal aid certificates, in my mind, is actually one of these that doesn't aid the lowering of the cost of access to justice.
yeah. Like there's people that I've worked with who we've had, like when I was working under a couple of the lawyers, I took the legal aid, and I helped keep a lot of people out of jail, and for the most part, kept them from even having a criminal record after I was through with it. And some of it, I would say a good 50% of it was paid for by legal aid when I was working under a particular lawyer. And I helped them in. What they did is I billed it at their rate, whatever they were allowed to bill it from, because they have a sliding scale that you're allowed to bill it. And so I billed it at their rate, and then they just put it in there and they get paid. It was a very, but legal aid is very complicated. They need to make it less complicated, and they also need to broaden some of its coverage. And people who make like some more money, like because sometimes people who qualify for legal aid, even if like you have to be pretty poor to get it, and if you're $1 an hour more poor than not than being
That
not poor.
actually, that actually is. If you compare where we are in Canada to the United States, in some parts of the United States, it's like it doesn't matter whether you're a billionaire or a pauper. And you're charged with a crime, you can actually choose to have the public defender defend you.
Yeah. Hmm.
Right? We don't have that in Canada.
Yep.
Right? Which basically means that for many people, that means that we end up with a bit of an odd system of, in our government, because we don't end up with everybody, that everybody has the right to a defense.
Yep. Like a certain extent, like say if you're accused of murder or something, they probably would help you with legal aid. But for the run of the mill crimes that happen, drinking and driving, um, assault, different things like that, those are what people commonly get charged with. There's not a lot of legal aid to go around, unless there's a threat of jail
Yeah.
or it can affect a person's employment. So there are things like that that you have to consider, and depending also on the person's income. But I think that to some extent, there are some cases where they could get money through the legal aid system, but cover a murder trial for someone who may not be poor, but is not exactly a billionaire either. So because there's a lot of people who are famous people in history who've had their cases covered by them. I, but it really needs a lot of improvement because I think that there's a lot of great criminal counsel out there who can do a great job, but it's not.
Oh, what happened there? Lost her. That's kind of weird, and this entire show without Angela kind of is nothing. I hope she comes back in a second or two, because she has such a long history of knowledge in the legal field, and as a long working paralegal, she said 32 years. I couldn't believe that, how long that was. Wow. It's a long time. That's such a long time. And there have been some people, not many people, that actually have that knowledge that Angela does, and I hope we get her back on. What happened?
Were you
That was
a little
weird.
for a little bit?
That was weird.
Yeah, it
So
just shut off.
what happened there?
It just
It
shut
was
off. I
like,
saw this little thing twirling around. I can't stand that thing. And it just shut off StreamYard for some reason. And I said, "What the heck, Peter? What are you doing to me?"
I did nothing. I
Oh,
did nothing. My hands were up.
oh
My hands
yes,
were up the whole time.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, sweet and innocent me. I didn't do a thing.
So basically, what's happened with all of this? Back when we were speaking on Bill 14, there was a parliamentary judicial committee that people go to speak on Bill 14. Virtually everybody who are among the paralegals spoke against regulation by the Law Society. And I remember counting them on the fingers of one hand. Five of them spoke for. I remember them personally. I mean, all right people, their arguments were fair and justified. Brian Laurie was one of the first ones.
Yeah.
I guess this was done in his honor. Right? And he would be sitting on the Law Society Paralegals Subcommittee. And unfortunately, the thing that we get really irritated with, we aren't even a majority on our own paralegal subcommittee.
Mm. That
Although
actually
we
is
do
weird.
chair.
And okay, so there are, when it comes to the Law Society bench, there are 30 odd lawyers and 5 paralegals, isn't it?
Yeah. I
And
think 40 lawyers.
yeah, somewhere in that region.
And
Yeah.
5 paralegals.
I'm
Yeah.
5 paralegals. I'm not.
Yeah, and
bitching
this
about
is
the
something
numbers.
that needs to be addressed. Like, I don't know whether, like, this can't be addressed by the Law Society.
Well,
Okay? This is legislation.
Well, I actually wonder. You were talking about the paralegal, paralegal subcommittee.
Yeah.
Right. Not even being a majority of paralegals on that subcommittee.
Yeah.
Surely it
I
occurs.
find that offensive. You
Yeah,
know,
but
I
you
think
could
we should have, like, maybe equal lawyers and equal paralegals. I don't know. Like, I really don't have the answer. Or maybe a tripartite committee where the public is also there. Okay?
Well, I was going to say the paralegal subcommittee. It occurs to me that you could add to that paralegal subcommittee longer term paralegals that have been in the industry for a while, that you could invite them on as honorary members of that paralegal subcommittee, and even have some members of the public on there.
Yeah. Yep. They already have members of the public. I forget the breakdown. Okay? But lawyers aren't a majority either on it.
Yeah.
It's but when you add the members of the public in, the paralegals are a minority. Okay? So it's done in a way that and they always had a chair who was a paralegal. Okay? So the paralegal would be chairing. And then they started writing the regulations of paralegals, setting it up, and they do the professional paralegal rules of conduct, and then they have the professional code of conduct for the lawyers and the paralegal rules of conduct. So they would help draft all of those things, and different things have to be put into it each year, and it goes into yeah. So all of these things, like when we've done all of this stuff, and then we also had our own association after that time, after licensing, we met, and the Licensed Paralegals of Association, which started as Agents of Court and the Paralegal Society of Ontario, they merged to become the Ontario Paralegal Association.
Yeah.
And to be our spokesperson. And basically, we need to be fighting for having a strong association that speaks for paralegals. It speaks for the profession, speaks for our interests, where Paralegals Association can also sit down with the Law Society, sit down with the Attorney General, sit down with court committees or the rules committees for the courts in the small claims.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things about the paralegal rules of conduct is that I've often looked at the paralegal rules of conduct and the actual the normal lawyer rules of conduct as well. And in fact, actually, the paralegal rules of conduct spurn out of the legal, the normal rules of conduct, the lawyer ones, and they do that for a reason. And in fact, they should really. I wonder to some extent whether is there a reason that we have 2 separate rules of conduct? There shouldn't be. I don't.
There shouldn't be. Like this is something like that you'll have like.
There are certain things
because you have, like, say if you have like the Ontario College of Certified Social Workers and Social Workers. Okay, yeah. So there's people who are MSW social workers, and then we have college educated certified social workers. Okay, yeah. They're both licensed, but they're relatively equal on their governing body.
Yeah.
Okay? So you'll get certified social workers, and you have your professional MSW social workers on the other side.
Yeah, but your rules of professional conduct take into consideration there are certain things that lawyers do, for example, closing on houses and things like that paralegals are not permitted to do. So therefore, the rules of conduct surrounding those areas are strictly for lawyers, whereas the rules of conduct for other areas, for example, tribunal representation, small claims court, etc., would be common to both.
Yeah. I think that, I don't know, because there's a lot of parts in the different rules that I look at. They're very similar,
Yeah.
if you're
Oh, yeah.
looking at common areas. But having them separate like that, I don't know how or what the purpose was. Maybe they wanted to hive off some of these subsections that are only for lawyers. I don't know. But we've got some very, it's very, very important that this happens. There's still issues that have to go. Like we talked about the old issues of access to justice. It's still going on.
One
And
of the
actually,
other
cool.
issues.
We're getting other people in BC, getting people in Alberta. We got the Alberta Association of Professional Paralegals, and we got the BC Association of Paralegals. And I think they got a Saskatchewan counterpart. I don't know what they call themselves, but they're doing things, and they're starting to push their respective governments to get into more of an Ontario model where they get individually licensed. In Alberta, it's
The
sort of
other
like
issue, the
regulatory
other
union.
issue that I see with this is one of the things I don't think the Law Society has got in its current model is translation of licenses. Paralegals that through the course of study, through the course of professional study, CPDs, additional college courses and college credits, and through longevity of service, we only have one class of paralegal at P1. Why can't we have multiple classes of paralegal based upon education that people have got, based upon years of service that people have got? And
Mhm.
for example, that I would say that, hey, that you know, based upon that, you're having been in the industry, you should be considered a P3, where you're fairly close to being a lawyer. And
Mhm.
yeah, and the other added exception, other added people that might be considered P2s and P3s are people that have law degrees from other jurisdictions, who
Like
may,
yours, really.
and other things like that, that have got more of higher levels of education, that or those that have proven themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
There needs to be some way to get up there. Like
Yeah,
there seems to be a movement afoot that there's a number of paralegals who are going off to become lawyers. And I think that that needs to be discussed about why that is. Like, I don't have an issue with it, but I think that if there's a whole group of people going off to be lawyers and then a lot of paralegals dropping out of the profession and be shown not practicing, like administratively
that's why.
suspended.
Well, actually, that is one of the reasons why I think you need that transition from one
Yeah,
profession to the other.
yeah, exactly. So people can feel comfortable. And
Yeah.
also to provide a lot more for the paralegals to do, so that the paralegals themselves, without having to get a whole lot of things and become lawyers, that they could do more things. I see people here that I talk to, like over the years here, I see a lot of people go out on their own. A lot of people go out on their own. And like I can identify them, like dozens, like I would say at least 20 that I've watched as I went in. And they're no longer there. They're no longer practicing.
Well, one of the other areas that I am actually concerned about, that concerns me a lot, is especially as of right now, I've got a couple of cases. One of which is definitely should be appealed from an LTB decision. I think the LTB decision is on the surface blatantly wrong. It is bad law. And I really mean that, bad law. I will say that again. I'm not going to back down on this one. It is
Is this
a
the one
bad.
that was lacking procedural fairness?
It's a bad judgment. It lacks procedural fairness, and basically, bluntly, it is in error in terms of landlord and tenant law, and lacks a lot of things. And essentially, at the end of the day, if I were a lawyer, I'd be reviewing that. But again, I'd be saying that, hey, paralegals need to be able to take cases that they have created, they've produced in, they've taken in, and they're the uh, a person of
So if you
record.
represented them at the tribunal level, and then if the decision goes
Why can't
south,
we
that
take
you should
them
be able
up?
to go up to
Yeah.
divisional. Yeah.
And we should be able to take them up to divisional, up to Ontario Court of Appeal, provided we have the training to do so.
Yeah, and that training should be available.
Yeah,
Okay?
through CPDs, through college, part-time college courses and the like.
Yeah, and there's different procedural paperwork, different procedural understanding of what a question of law is, although that's changing with some recent Supreme Court Canada decisions. But there is some stuff that people need to look at, and they can be able to take advantage of some of these things, which would allow us to have a say in and actually making law too.
Well, the thing is, a paralegal could have a say in making law, insofar as a paralegal could be elected to Parliament and make laws that way.
Oh yeah, that would be good. Yep. Yeah, neither you or I were able to even get elected to city council, so I don't know how that works.
Okay, so let's look at paralegals in the future.
Yeah. So we need to look at paralegals in the future. We need to look at our education system. How are we educating our paralegals? Are we monitoring the number of paralegals that go out? Because I think that there's a lot of over licensing of paralegals. How do we test people before they go into the courses to be paralegals? Are we allowing an 18-year-old to get into a course where they can potentially handle criminal cases? These things, do have a disturbing implication. I think that these things need to be talked about, and they also need to be discussed. But how about the ones that are left over? What can they do? Is there a way up? Everybody wants to climb the ladder somehow. Hey, how do we do that?
Well, that's exactly why I talked about the concept of climbing the ladder.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
an important point. It's an important point that I think the Law Society is missing out upon.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And also, too, how about people who are regulated as a paralegal but maybe practicing in another profession? There could be a conflict of interest with that other profession.
The possibility does certainly exist, but you see, for example, well, I've got another profession insofar as I'm a chartered IT professional. Thank you to the British Computer Society. So BCS granted me a charter.
The BS what?
British Computer Society.
Oh, I see.
Chartered IT professional status. So proud of that. Two professions. Does that mean that I'm going to be advising on IT matters? I could do that. I could pick that up at any time. Not saying I want to pick that up at any time, but the point being is that once you've been interested in something, you often stay interested, right? And again, like police officers who become lawyers and paralegals, good for them.
Yeah,
right.
There's a lot of them who do because they see a lot of things, and then a lot of them go out to practice criminal or traffic court, different kinds of law to help defend things, because they kind of know how things work when they're out on the beat. So they go back. Hey, I do a lot of tribunal work and a lot of work with courts, some litigation, and Peter does a lot of municipal work, licensing, bylaws, all that different things. We all do landlord and tenant. There's animal. I like to get into animal rights, which
well, and also environmental tribunals as well.
Yeah, exactly. One of our people does that. Yeah. So we're looking into doing a number of things, and we also practice mediation. We have a mediator on staff, and we might have two. So these are things that we try to do our best to try to provide as much as we can, okay? And trying to work, to provide for the public, okay? But unfortunately, the paralegal community has to learn how to work together to build for its future. if you get people going into a society or a board or something like that, and there's infighting, or people want to have different goals and different things, it's not going to work as well. We need to work, and there was a few years ago, there was a strategic plan that set up where we need to go. And the strategic plan was pretty excellent, and much of it is still applicable today. So I'm hopefully going to be seeing that being implemented, and I certainly want to be part of that. So this is taking a little bit longer than we wanted, but doing the future, we have to think of ourselves in the future. How is artificial intelligence going to influence our practices? How is continued access to justice going to be influencing our practices? How can we be effective in, say, an elder law, for example? Because there's a growing number of people who are older in our society. So there's a whole stream of things that will impact on our profession.
An older law, there's a lot more people who today who are saying, well, I'll take my pension when I'm 65, but I'm going to continue working.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Because, well, first of all, the pension is not enough to live on.
Yeah.
Given that fast inflation made everything twice or three times as expensive since 2020. I mean, that's bad, right? But I think that, but people are able to keep on working, and this was also other laws that were struck down using Canadian human rights law to strike down the laws around retirement. Right? There are only very few people who have to retire at a specific age, but they're usually in specific professions. And
law is one of them, because in fact you have to retire at 75 as a judge.
Yeah.
And as a justice of the peace.
You can be a judge at 75, but then you can retire, and then you can go back to practicing law until you're 95. Yeah. And you can die at your desk. One of them just retired, Joseph Quinn, the Honorable Joseph Quinn in our area. He was a judge for many years, and he just retired, maybe reaching 75, I don't know. But he's gone back to his law firm, and he's offering services. And he's a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah. All right. And okay, so I think we've kind of gone through the various options there about paralegal, the history of the paralegal movement here in Ontario. I think it's been a fascinating ride, and you kind of go from that 1986 decision to the licensing of paralegals in 2007. And that seems to have been a bumpy road in that gap,
And there's going to be also some importance where paralegals and lawyers might have to work jointly together on many initiatives.
Yeah.
Right? Like paralegals should be able to join law associations and join their board.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, actually, that's
able to use the law library, do different things.
That's an interesting question, because talking about law associations, I've been in touch with our Lincoln Law Association, and they want to have paralegals on. They would love to have paralegals on, at least those that are active on it. The trouble is they can't get the quorum for a meeting to actually make a decision on that. And
we should join first, and then we'll create a quorum.
We'll help them create the quorum.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these are very important things. And then there's also other associations, like you talk about environment in the law, women in the law, things like that, where paralegals and lawyers should work together in a lot of these things.
Well, Indigenous,
to advance the interests of legal interests of particular things like environment, women, animals.
Indigenous,
Indigenous law is a very separate but very interesting thing. So that is something that we need to look to in the future. I'm one of the people, I'm not as hostile to lawyers as some paralegals are. I mean, they're people. They're just doing their job.
Yeah.
You get good and bad in every profession.
Yeah. And I think you've got to work with everybody. You turn around. Well, the first person I worked with in this profession outside of our firm was actually a lawyer. Next person I worked with was a paralegal, and the paralegal was was a hard case. Right, the lawyer was actually much easier by comparison. because they've been taught proper negotiation, whereas the paralegal thinks that they have to be hard-nosed to be a negotiator.
Yeah, and that's very difficult because these are something like I might want to do a presentation sometime on mediation and invite a qualified mediator to speak about mediation and alternative dispute resolution. Hey, and both the benefits of that.
Yeah, I think we should think about that and invite one along.
Yeah,
all right.
So, you know, lots of them.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we can kind of call it quits on that particular subject for today, and remind everybody that if you need to contact Invictus Legal LLP, you can do so calling us at 905-688-5598. Angela's available by email at angela@weareinvictus.legal, and I'm available at peter@weareinvictus.legal, and our website is https://weareinvictus.legal, and you can find the link down there because I put it there earlier on.
Okay.
All right. And for Angela, her favorite topic of the evening.
Well, what you heard today in Spin Legal is not legal advice, nor is it legal advice for anything else you heard on Spin Legal in earlier episodes. If you do need legal advice, please stop by Invictus Legal or contact another paralegal or a lawyer, and just to make sure that you get advice that's more specifically tailored to your situation.
All right. And with that, we thank you for being here, and have a wonderful week. And we shall see you back on Spin Legal, I guess, in a week's time at about 6:30 next Wednesday.
Okay. Good.
Thank you.